Hello students, welcome to AriserTalent. As you know, we are studying very important chapter of NCERT, that is how do organisms reproduce, in which in my last lecture I told you about the asexual reproduction. Now in this lecture I am going to teach you about the sexual reproduction. Okay, so today our topic of discussion is sexual reproduction. Okay, what is sexual reproduction? Sexual reproduction means the type of reproduction or the process in which two different types of sex, means male sex and female sex, are involved. Okay, and thus we can say that they are from the different parent. Okay, they are of the different parent. So let me write sexual reproduction. In this process, two different sexes like male sex and female sex from different parent are involved. Okay, and after the fusion of these gametes, these are known as male gamete and female gamete. So after the fusion of these gametes, a zygote is formed which grows into the embryo. Okay, or new organism is formed by that. So here let me write after the fusion of male gamete and female gamete, after the fusion of male gamete and female gamete, a zygote is formed okay, and by this zygote a new organism is developed. By this zygote means zygote, it takes division in the zygote. That zygote, the whatever the cells are present in that, they divides and convert into an embryo, and then it forms a new organism. Okay, by this zygote an embryo is formed and by it a new organism develops. A new organism develops. Okay, so this is the process of sexual reproduction. It means male gamete and female gamete when the fusion between male gamete and female gamete, zygote is formed, and from the zygote a new embryo is developed, and from the embryo a new organism is developed. Okay, an embryo and from it new organism is developed. Fine. So this is the whole process of sexual reproduction. Now we will talk about the difference between asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Generally what happens in asexual reproduction, generally one parent take part in it. Okay, but in the sexual reproduction two parents take part. Okay, difference between what? Asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. what happens in asexual reproduction? Generally one parent take part in it. In the asexual reproduction, only one parent takes part. Okay, and in this sexual reproduction, two different parents take part in it. Okay, in this asexual reproduction there is no different sex gametes. Okay, but in the sexual reproduction different sex gametes are there and they take part in the sexual reproduction. As well as we must say it is amitotic or maybe mitotic division. But sexual reproduction may be mitotic or meiosis. It may be mitotic or meiosis. Okay. So these are the main differences between asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Now we will talk about sexual reproduction in the plants. Next, our topic is sexual reproduction in plants. Here we can say we are talking about a flower. Okay, here we can see a well blooming flower is there. Okay, so there are the different parts of flower. What are they? Here we can see this part of the flower is known as thalamus. Okay, and then this green part of flower is known as calyx. Fine. Generally calyx has sepals. Here we can see these parts are known as sepals, which are green in color. Now what is the function of this sepal? As we all know that these sepals protect the flowering bud before it opens. Okay, this is the function of this sepal. Now as we go up, then we can find some colorful petals here. Generally this is the calyx part of the flower. Okay, generally it consists many colorful petals. Okay, what is the function of these petals? Generally these petals attract the insects for the pollination. Okay, now then the another part is what? Anthrocium. Here we can see Anthrocium is there, which contains what? It contains anther and filament. Here we can see these parts are known as anther and filament. This circular part is known as anther, which contains what? Which contains pollens. Okay, and this filament is known as, this part is known as filament, means this filament bears the anther on the top of the filament. Fine. Then the other part, here we can see this part is known as what? This part is known as pistil. Okay, and this is generally known as gynoecium. Gynoecium means female reproductive organ in the flower. Okay, so generally what are the different parts of this female reproductive organ? Generally it is known as pistil or gynoecium. It has different parts. The upper part is known as stigma, on which generally pollens come and do the pollination. Fine. Then just below the stigma there is style. This tubular structure is known as, this brown tubular structure is known as stigma. And here we can see this part is known as ovary. Inside the ovary are ovules, in which ovum are produced. Okay, ovum or eggs are produced. Generally the fertilization takes place here in the ovary itself. Okay, so this is the structure of flower. Now let me define you structure of flower. Generally a flower has different parts: calyx, corolla Anthrocium and Gynoecium. Generally it has 4 main parts. 4 main parts. What are they? Number 1, calyx. Then number 2 is corolla, Anthrocium and Gynoecium. Anthrocium means male reproductive organ and Gynoecium means female reproductive organ. Okay. Now we will talk about them in detail. First of all, we will talk about calyx. Number 1 is calyx. Here we can see that the calyx is the first wall of the flower. Okay, it is the outermost wall of the flower. It consists what? It consists sepals. It consists sepals. Okay. Now what are sepals? Generally sepals are green in color and they protect the flowering bud before it opens. Sepals are green in color and protects the flowering bud before it opens. Okay. This is all about the sepals, these green sepals. Now next we will talk about corolla. Second part is corolla. Next is corolla. Here we can see this part is known as corolla, which consists colorful petals. Okay. It is the second wall of the flower. It consists of colorful petals. Okay. What is the function of these petals? These colorful petals generally attract the insects for the pollination. Okay. These colorful petals attract the insects for pollination. Okay, what is pollination? Pollination is the process by which pollen grains come on the flower and then the fertilization takes place inside the ovary. Okay. So here we have talked about the corolla. Next we will talk about Anthrocium. Next is Androtium, Androtium, what is Androtium? Generally Androtium is the male reproductive organ in the flower. It is male reproductive organ in the flower. Okay, it has generally two parts, anther and filament. Okay, it has two parts, anther and filament. Okay, if we talk about anther, then anther is the ovule part. Here we can see it is the ovule part. It is ovule in shape. It is oval in shape. It is oval in shape and present at the top of the filament. Okay, and what is filament? Filament is a tube-like structure. Filament, it is a tube-like structure. Tube-like structure. It is a tube-like structure. At the top of it, anther is present. Okay, and generally in the anther, pollen grains are present. So this is all about the Androtium. Now we will talk about Gynoecium. Gynoecium, here we can see it has three main parts, or it has four main parts. Okay, stigma, style, ovary and ovule. Gynoecium, next is Gynoecium. What is Gynoecium? It is the female reproductive organ in the flower. It is the female reproductive organ in the flower. Okay, it has four main parts. What are they? Stigma, okay, then style, ovule, ovary and ovule, ovary and ovule. Okay, stigma is generally here we can see this is the topmost part of the this is the topmost part of the flower. Okay, and then it grows in the form of style, and at the bottom here we can say oval shaped ovary is there. Inside the ovary a sac like structures, many sac like structures, ovules are present, and inside the ovule generally egg cell is present. Okay, so this is all about the Gynoecium. Now we will talk about what? We will talk about pollination. These were the parts of the flower. Now we will talk about the pollination, that what is the pollination and what are the types of pollination. Next is pollination. Okay, here we can see this is stigma. When the pollens from other flowers come here on the stigma, means transfer of pollen grains from one flower to the another flower for pollination, for the process of fertilization, that is known as pollination. Okay, so here when the pollen grains come here on the stigma, and then the fertilization take place. How it takes place? Then when they come here in the stigma, then they are induced by the substance which is produced by the stigma, that is sugary substance, and then these pollen grains develop a tube like structure, and then it goes to the ovary, which we will talk in the next structure. Here we can see this is the complete process of pollination as well as fertilization. Pollination means when the pollen grains come here on the stigma, means transfer of pollen grains from one flower to the another flower. Okay. So, pollination, transfer of pollen grains, transfer of pollen grains from one flower to another. Okay, this process is known as pollination. Generally, pollination is of two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Okay. So, transfer of pollen grain from one flower to another to the carpel here. Okay, that is known as pollination. It is of two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. So, here we are talking about self-pollination and cross-pollination. Pollination means when the pollen grains transfer from one plant to another. So, what happens when these pollen grains transfer from anther to the stigma of the same plant, that it is known as self-pollination. But when the pollen grains move or transfer from anther to the stigma of the different plant of the same species, that is known as cross-pollination. Okay, self-pollination when the pollen grains transfer from anther to stigma of the same plant, of the same flower, okay, or plant, that is known as self-pollination. And cross-pollination means when the pollen grains transfer from the anther to stigma to the of the different plant of the same species, that is known as cross pollination. Now, as I told you, in pollination generally what happens, pollen grains move from anther to stigma. Okay, this is known as pollination, but how it takes place? Generally it takes place by some agents. Okay, and what are these agents? These agents are birds, winds, air, insects, bats. Okay, so these are the agents of pollination. Fine. So, let me tell you agents of pollination. Or we can write agencies also. Agencies of pollination. Generally, it is of two types, biotic and abiotic. Okay, if we talk about biotic agencies, then they are, examples are birds, bats, insects. Okay, and if we talk about abiotic agencies, then they are water and wind. Okay, so these are the agents of pollination. What are biotic agencies and abiotic agencies? Means when the pollination is caused by the birds, bat or insect, that is biotic. These are known as biotic agencies or biotic agents, and when the pollination is done by water and wind, okay, then these factors are known as abiotic agencies. Now we will talk about fertilization. Here we can see the fertilization. Fertilization means the fusion of male and female gamete to form a new organism. Okay, next is fertilization. Next topic is fertilization. What is fertilization? The process of fusion of male gamete and female gamete to form a new organism. Okay, so here as we are talking about the fertilization in the plant, so here the male gamete is anther, means pollen grains, and female gamete is what? Female gamete here is egg cell. Okay, so now let me explain you how the fertilization take place in the plants. When the pollination takes place, means pollen grains come here on the stigma and pollination take place, then they generate what? They generate these pollen tubes. Okay, and then here these pollen tubes, what happens? These pollen tubes penetrate the style and reaches to the ovary. Fine, here we can see that these pollen tubes are penetrating style. Style is the part of female reproductive organ. These are penetrating what? These are penetrating style, and then these tubes are reaching to the ovary here. Fine, what happens now? The nucleus here in the pollen tube divides and forms the two male gametes. Okay, here we can see these are known as sperm nuclei. So these are male gametes. Fine. So when these male gametes reaches here in the ovary, and especially when they reach here in the ovule, then one male gamete get fused with the egg cell and form zygote. What happens? In the pollen tube, nucleus divides and forms two male gametes. Okay, form two male gametes. One male gamete, here we can see one male gamete get fuses with the egg cell. One male gamete fuses with egg cell and forms zygote. Okay, it forms zygote. And the another male gamete here, it get fuses with what? With the double nucleus. Okay, it get fuses other male gamete fuses with the two polar nucleus. Okay, and what they form? They form generally triple, or we can say triploid nucleus. Okay, and thus this is known as what? This complete process is known as triploid double fertilization, because one fertilization is done here and the second fertilization is done here. So this completely known as double fertilization. This process is known as double fertilization. So this is how the new organism develops from a flower. Okay, now what happens when generally when the zygote is formed, then slowly the rest of the parts start degrading. Okay, what happens after the fertilization? This is the complete plant cycle. Here what happens, we can see here the fertilization has taken place. Okay, then it converts into the mature seed. Okay, as I told you that the plant grows, then here as I told you the structure of flower, pollination has taken place, fertilization is taken place here. Okay, then after the fertilization a new seed is formed. Fine. And then from this fruit, these seeds, fruit is formed in the ovary. When I told you that fertilization take place in the ovary in the previous diagram, let's go back. Here I told you that fertilization takes place here in the ovary. Okay, then a fruit is formed. As the result, a fruit is formed. Fine. Here inside the fruits many seeds are developed, and these seeds again germinate and then they grow into the new seedling. This is the complete life cycle of a plant, or we may say this is the complete life cycle of a flower. So hope in this lecture you enjoyed the lecture and everything is clear to you. Thank you.